So with this week's episode of Mob Psycho 100, the theme is definitely growing up, and at first I thought it was going to be primarily focused on Mob because, over the course of this season, we've seen him start to do things and say things he never would say in season 1. He's definitely putting himself out there. You kick the episode off with his teammates and schoolmates basically kind of praising him, being like, hey, you're able to do so many push-ups now, give it a few months, you might even be able to surpass us. You're seeing a lot of support towards Mob, and yes, even though Reigen does care for Mob, he still uses him more than anyone else. And I like the idea that you kick off the episode with such a really air of positivity and support surrounding Mob, to then him really being upset that he has to keep giving up his social life because yes, even he can have one, so a man doesn't have to work and he has to do all these exorcism jobs. I thought it was going to stay focused on Mob, and for the first little chunk it was, but when we shift over to Reigen and really learn that this episode in this arc is actually focusing on Reigen and how he has to grow up, not Mob, that was a nice surprise. I really do like the dynamic between Mob and Reigen in this season, primarily on Mob's side because, like I mentioned, he is starting to actually put himself out there and you're really seeing a lot of growth, and a guy who is as powerful as Mob, he really does let himself be pushed around, and there's so many moments in this episode between him and Reigen where Reigen's saying like, you gotta stop letting people use you and walk over you, when really that should be directed towards Reigen, not Reigen directing it towards Mob. Because seriously, as much as I love their dynamic, I think something like this separation, this almost divorce, had to happen because Reigen needs to grow up and Mob needs to put himself first for once and do what he feels is right. Obviously, I know they're going to come back together. This isn't going to be a permanent thing, especially since we haven't even finished the season yet. But I do like what this is doing to the central dynamic and how you have just a wild card like Dimple just kind of looking in on the outside being like, well, damn, screw Reigen. I'm going to stick with this boy, and I can clearly see Reigen's holding himself together just fine. Not really, but I'm going to go back to Mob. I like how, if you look at season 1, you would think that Dimple would probably side with Reigen because, Reigen's the con artist, he wants to be with a guy who can help him get what he wants, but after Mob trusted him enough to take over his body and leave willingly, there's no reason why he would stick with Reigen over Mob. I really like that development. It really showcases why this season is so great. And just to see where Reigen goes, he gets essentially drunk when there's no alcohol in his drink. He's learning that, on his birthday, he really doesn't have friends. And the only family that talks to him on his birthday is his mother saying, you need to grow up. On one hand, you're like, Reigen brought this upon himself. He used Mob for too long, didn't treat Mob as an actual friend and as an equal, but as a tool to be used, who, yes, was on his side when it truly counted, but still, he's a con artist and he was conning Mob. And as he's realizing that all of his friends are really just potential clientele and that his business really can't exist without Mob, he has to grow up and put himself out there. And I like the kind of almost training montage of him, taking on all these jobs, actually doing these exorcism jobs, but doing things that other psychics wouldn't handle, playing an online game to the point that he nearly kind of kills himself to take this out, to then getting that national TV because the one psychic wants revenge for him kneeing him. Next week's going to be very fun. I'm very excited to see where this is going to go and how both Mob and Reigen will grow from this separation and where he's going to go. Because, there's a moment in this episode where Mob's at karaoke and, he doesn't have the rhythm down and it doesn't look like he's having that much fun. But then again, it's hard to tell when Mob is having fun because he is so emotionless most of the time. So I do feel like he is going to start missing Reigen, and Reigen is going to start missing Mob, and they are going to come together, and maybe they'll come out on more equal terms. Maybe not so, I'm going to call you randomly and force you to stop whatever you're doing. Maybe there'll be a bit more schedule planning. I do expect there's going to be some sort of growth here that will bring them closer and maybe help both of them grow up, because over this season we've seen Mob put himself out there time and time again, and this was the biggest moment for me because it really went against Reigen, his master, the one guy he really didn't go against all that much, and the fact that he's willing to just skip out on the job and put a bit of distance, that really shows growth, and it gives him a spine in a lot of ways, something that Mob really never had, at least going against Reigen. The art in this episode and the animation was incredible. My favorite part of Mob Psycho is when it goes goofy and funky and just a little wild, stuff you don't get to see in anime too often. There's so many moments where I just assume they're pulling straight from the manga, these very just under detailed shots that are so hilarious, but then you have these other shots which are so colorful and bright, the over the top reactions. Reigen definitely was the star in this episode in that regard. It was Reigen's kind of shocked faces, you could say, but there was a ton of very fun shots that were just you pause it and you're like, this is so under detailed, but it's so beautiful all at the same time because of the way the line work is being used, as well as the colors and how they're blending it together, the over-the-top reactions. I just love how this anime looks in any given episode, but this episode in particular, because it really was about growth and growing up, they really got to highlight some of these expressions, and you really got inside the character's head, both with Mob as well as Reigen, primarily Reigen, but Mob in the intro stages of this episode definitely had a lot of moments where you're just like, he seems pretty pissed and he seems a tad annoyed, and when you have a powerful psychic like Mob, you don't want him to get too pissed off, because we've seen what 100% looks like. This episode was great. I think Reigen's voice actor, there was something about him in this episode that really shocked me, and just like, you kind of felt like this was an actor who kind of really bought into the idea that Reigen is recognizing his faults, but at the same time, he's trying to convince himself that he's in the right and Mob was the wrong one, he can do it alone. And I thought the way his actor kind of delivered this Reigen performance over these 20 minutes here, there was this steady progression that really, you kind of bought into it. You felt like this was a con artist, that you were almost getting conned by Reigen, and it was just nice to see him at the lowest of the lows that I can remember Reigen being at, but also the highest of the highs, because he ends going on national TV, and if he succeeds, he won't need anything else. He'll be the top psychic. But you also see him at the most vulnerable, and at one point I was like, is he going to get possessed by an evil spirit? Because he was really looking bad in this episode. I think next week is one of the most anticipated episodes for me, because this is the first time I feel like the central crew could truly be broken, and I'm interested to see how it could be mended, if it even can be mended, where they're going to go, and how the music was working in this episode, especially in the first little separation scene where you're just seeing the montages of what Mob's doing and what Reigen's doing. There was this very nice acoustic track. There was just the music as a whole was really building into the atmosphere to make you feel a little emotional. I mean, this season of Mob Psycho 100 definitely has been the most emotional thus far, but the way music is really able to capture these complex feelings is something to praise, because in a series like Mob Psycho, that you start off thinking it's going to just be a very fun action show, the way there is so much emotion from the visuals to the audio, all the little soundtracks that you'll listen to, it really, really impresses me. This season of Mob Psycho 100 is incredible. The Mob and Reigen stuff is amazing. Dimple has been growing and developing into such a wild card that he's honestly becoming one of my favorites, and I thought he was just kind of like the mascot in season 1, but he's really becoming an all-star in this season as well. We haven't really got to see much of Mob's brother this season, and I'm glad that, you know, in the moment that he sees his brother basically saying like, hey, I'm gonna start doing things for myself, he's appreciating that, right? He's seeing like, you know, his brother, who he always had to protect, feeling like he was the weak one, is now standing up for himself and actually putting himself first rather than putting others and letting them trample all over him. You're seeing that a lot with a lot of these side characters. You're seeing the bodybuilding club. You're seeing all of his friends kind of being like, they know his master is probably a scumbag, but Mob's a nice guy. He's going to help people out. I mean, look at how much he's helped them out. And just seeing that, you know, for as short as it was, because it really was Reigen's episode, I really felt proud of Mob in this episode. And there's been quite a few moments throughout the season that I felt proud of the boy, because he really is putting himself out there and realizing that, you know, I don't want to do what Reigen wants me to do. We've seen it when he, you know, Reigen was forcing him, like, you have to take care of these ghosts, but it was just a peaceful family, and he realizes that they were fine. And Reigen did ultimately side with Mob, saying like it was okay, but there's so many moments that Reigen's forced Mob to do things that he didn't want to do, but before he really didn't have a backbone and did it because his master said so. And the fact that he did fully kind of like cut ties with Reigen, obviously not permanently, but for the time being, it shows you that Mob is someone who really is becoming his own person and doesn't need someone like Reigen. Really, Reigen needs Mob more than Mob needs Reigen, but at the same time, there was a genuine friendship and almost family dynamic there that you don't want to see it totally tossed out the window. So hopefully the two can kind of, you know, sit down and talk and figure out and work out their problems. I would like to see Reigen admit to Mob that he isn't a psychic and that, you know, he needs Mob. I think that's what should happen. I don't know if that will happen or not, but it would be nice to see Reigen admit to Mob what's been going on all this time. As much as it might ruin the dynamic we've had up till now, I think it would lead to a very interesting dynamic going forward where there would actually be honesty. You could still have the con artist Reigen conning people, but having him actually admit to Mob, I think that'd be a really interesting development. Maybe it will happen, maybe it won't, maybe they'll just come together and maybe Reigen will still kind of play Mob a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see where that dynamic is going to go, because there's really a lot of ways that they could grow these two characters and this relationship going forward, and I hope next week is absolutely going to deliver. Next week can't come soon enough. Really, this is going to lead to some very very interesting development, and the fact that we have such a pissed off psychic going against Reigen, how is that going to happen? Is Mob going to come in to save the day? Is Reigen going to outplay the con artist, or is he going to be made a laughingstock? Really, anything could happen, and that's pretty exciting. What a great cliffhanger to wrap up this episode of Mob Psycho 100. Really, everything about this episode was just comfy and fun and a little bit tragic, all wrapped up into one beautiful package. But for manga readers, how was the adaptation for this episode? Was it pretty one for one? Did it do what you were expecting for anime originals like myself? What did you think of this episode? Did it hit you like myself, or was it just a little lackluster for you? Let me know whatever you're feeling down in that comment section below, and also remember to leave a like if you did enjoy, and hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. But until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.